Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. Hey, on Life Support, we talk about topics that maybe other programs don't, but what we believe is that through trauma, through difficulties, through suffering, God does a work in us in ways that sometimes we don't have done in times of joy, in times of gladness. And so we don't go to the dark side, but we do talk about difficult topics. And the man we have with us today knows about struggle. His name is Cris Krusen. He's a filmmaker and a writer, president of Messenger Films. And in our last time together, Cris, you were telling me about your son Daniel through a journey of mental illness and the struggles with that and the parental heartbreak with that. And we ended up at the end talking about this movie that you kind of landed on through this because that's your background and that's what you do. And it's called Let Me Have My Son. And what I'm intrigued about as a father who has journeyed with children with mental illness, who's lost his son through violent crime and through all of these things in my heart, I'm always thinking, I wish somebody could hear this story. I wish somebody could have known my son. I wish somebody could look inside my son and see past his mental illness and to who he really is. And so I see this title, Let Me Have My Son. Tell me about that. And tell me how this formed in your mind to make this movie. And then what do you do when you get an idea like this? Because for most of us, we're thinking movies seem like 100 miles away. So what kind of process have you gone through to do this?
Yeah. Well, perhaps I could just take a moment to, I'll say, fully answer the last question you asked me when we last spoke.
Please do.
And that is to say, yes, I've wanted to make this movie to elevate my son and to tell his story and thereby dignify him, if you will. I also have wanted to make this film in an effort to bring some comfort to others who have gone through, similar things or even somewhat related things, because suffering is suffering, right?
Yep.
And it may not be mental illness; it could be something else, or it could be maybe at the fringe of mental illness. It could have been a suicide, perhaps. Whatever it is. There's kind of a thread there that people can relate to one another through, and so. But who among us, I guess you could say, gets to make a movie about that experience, right? So I really want this movie to be a shared experience, if I can say that, where parents and siblings, by the way, and close friends, not just parents.
Yep.
This is a way to connect in their individual suffering. So that's very, very important for me in the making of this film. And now to answer the question that you just asked, I would say, well, what happened was I did put those prayer letters that I talked about, I did put those prayer letters together into a book. And I kind of thought, well, that'll be it, in terms of how far I take this, if you will. But the idea of making a film about it never began to come into my heart and never really left me. And because I'm a writer, I decided, well, let me start to put some of the thoughts and impressions that I'm receiving, let me begin to put them together into a script, a screenplay. And, we can just take it from there. This is an inner dialogue I'm having. We'll see how it turns out and see if maybe there's potential in that process to make a film. And so I just kind of set to work on what we call a spec basis. No one had hired me to write this screenplay. It was purely personal at that point. And and deeply personal. And then I began to think, well, what approach do I take to the story? Do I make it as a documentary, which is really not my forte, to be quite honest, or do I take a more narrative filmmaking approach? And I decided more on the narrative approach. But then I began to think, well, he's been institutionalized for so many years, nothing much has really happened. Now that's kind of a dumb thing to say for a filmmaker to say that, because you can do anything.
Yeah, for sure.
You can make anything interesting, slice of life story. So maybe we should excise that comment.
No, I understand what you're getting at, though. I mean, as far as the narrative that we see from the outside, it seems to have stalled, but there's a lot going on, of course.
Yeah, stalled is a good word. But anyway, what I decided upon eventually, well, I shouldn't say I decided upon, I kind of got an inspiration for how to tell the story, which would be that, and I don't want to give away everything, but let me put it to you this way, if I may. The movie begins with a crawl at the beginning of these words: I want to tell you the story of my son. More to the point, perhaps, the story of his father. A good bit of what you are about to see is true. More than that is true of how it felt. And even more than that is true of how it will be. Well, now, if you're out there in the audience, Christian or not, it's kind of mysterious, isn't it? So a good bit about what I'm about to see is true, but more is true as to how it felt. How does that translate visually? You know, and that's all deliberate, of course, because as you will see when you watch the film, it is not purely a factual depiction of events. There are departures into other realms, if I may put it that way. And yet it does tell a complete story. And for me, most importantly, both for my son and myself, frankly, is what it points to at the end in terms of what it shall be.
Yeah.
That'll be a huge takeaway for the audience. And I can only pray that that message of what it shall yet be will fall on fertile ground. I know it won't fall on fertile ground everywhere. We have the parable of the sower to instruct us that does not happen. Seed falls on a hardened path. It falls in the thorns among rocks. But some of the seed falls on fertile ground. Yeah. And it bears an abundant harvest.
And God will take it where He wants it to go, and He'll help it to land the way He wants it to land. And as I'm listening to you talk about this film, Let Me Have My Son, I mean, I'm getting emotional thinking about what I might see, and I can't even imagine how hard that must have been to write. I mean, it must have opened up a lot of wounds and probably healing at the end of the day. Yeah. It's kind of like when you're talking about a tragedy and it's so difficult, but you find at the end, oh, that helped.
Yeah, I believe the word is catharsis.
Yeah, right. Yeah, is that how was it a difficult experience to do?
Yes, and perhaps acting the role of the father was more difficult than but they were both difficult or challenging, but ultimately rewarding. You know, I'm a director, first and foremost, though I love acting. I think if I had a choice, I'd just pick acting, because I really enjoy acting. But historically, I've been much more behind the camera. And not only that, in this particular film, I'm playing the leading role. I mean, so I'm very much in front of the camera a lot, And what that does, or the pitfall there, the danger, is that sometimes you miss things because you're so much into the acting part, the directing can get away from you. And so that was a challenge to make sure I was able to keep that part of it intact, the directing, But I would say the acting, to your point about the difficulty of it, that at times was painful, beyond words. But when you know the purpose for what you're going through, or what you're experiencing, boy, I mean, really, that's what more do you need, right?
That's
if
right.
you know why you're doing what you're doing, then who can stop you, really?
That's right. And especially as believers, when we know that God is in it, and we know that the purpose goes beyond just as we talked last time, a temporal moment, that can be hugely motivating as well and can really fortify us when we're talking about difficult issues. I don't like going places and talking about my stuff.
Yeah.
I don't relish when somebody calls and says, can you come over here and talk about victim reconciliation and this kind of stuff? But I do it because I know God wants me to, and then every time I do it, God just comes with me, and we get through it together, and we, at the end of the day, there'll always be like one person who kind of, you drive away going, I think it helped that one person, and that was worthwhile.
That's right.
So you're doing this all on your own. You're starting this whole process. So how do you go about then gathering a crew and doing all the things you need to do to make a movie?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, I have some experience to draw on.
Yep.
So what's that saying? It's not my first rodeo.
Yep. Yep.
So that helps, of course. Even I will say the man who's doing the score, the music score, who's composing the music, he's worked with me on 3 other films in the past. So, there's a shorthand there. There's a relationship. Our sound designer, who's here locally in the Minneapolis area, we've worked together before. But a lot of people, it was the first time I'd ever worked with them, and it's always a challenge. Producing, I'm also one of the producers on the film, so that's the nuts and bolts of it all, and making sure the train is moving down the track. Fundraising is nothing happens without the money.
Yeah, right.
And you'll hear people say, kind of universally, the most difficult part of making a film is raising the finances.
Yeah.
You hear that just everywhere. And I was no exception in regard to that. But again, I had been in this position before where I had nothing to start with, and I just began kind of scratching, knocking at whatever door would present itself. Messenger Films is a 501c3, so we've existed through contributions over the years, the kindness and generosity of donors. So I went to some of those donors to just kind of get this thing moving, kick it off. Can you put some seed money in here to get us going? And some people did do that. But this movie in particular was very, very difficult for me, for us to navigate because the finances really kind of trickled in. But you know what? They trickled in right when they were needed.
Yeah, it seems like that's how God does it.
Yeah. And then just a month ago, we received a major gift, which just allowed us to just vault forward on our post-production, because the movie's completely filmed, apart from one little postscript we're doing next week. It's completely filmed, it's edited, and now we're into the music and the sound design and all the visual effects and so forth. So a long process. It's this film, the idea, or that process I mentioned to you earlier about, well, let me just sit down and start writing.
Yeah.
That probably began 4 or 5 years ago. And then I remember in February of 2018, so now 2.5 years ago, I completed a very rough first draft of the script. And I said, you know what? We have something here. This is genuine. This is real. This deserves to be made into a film. And that realization really has kept me going right up to the moment.
All right, off topic a little bit. Define these terms for me, okay? Because we all just go to the movies. We have no idea we watch the movie. That was great, not great, whatever. Okay, you see executive producer, you see producer. Sometimes you see executive producer, executive producer, executive producer, executive producer, producer. Okay, define those two terms quickly for me. What does an executive producer do?
Well, typically the executive producer is the money guy.
The fundraiser or the one who has the money that puts it into the investor?
He either has the money or he makes the connection.
Gotcha. Okay.
Or he has some name draw, like Steven Spielberg could agree. Obviously, he won't do it if he doesn't agree, but lend his name to the project. That's all he does. But that's huge, right? So a producer, on the other hand, is possibly one of the hardest working people you'll ever meet. And he's the guy that I like to say he keeps the train on the tracks. They're just, perhaps you saw the funny commercial some years ago where the director, it's a TV commercial, and he's saying, bigger, he wants it bigger.
Right, yeah.
And trust me, there's a producer off in the wings there saying, no.
Yeah, smaller. Yeah.
Right.
So he's keeping the project on time. He's keeping the money. He's watching the budget, all those kind of things.
Sure.
And then when you talk about
by the way, you have subsets of producers. You have a production manager and a production coordinator and a line producer and an associate producer. And
a lot of stuff going on.
So yeah.
And then what about? So you mentioned post. You're doing the work. What is involved with that?
Well, post-production, the post after refers to after the filming is complete. So that involves the editing, of course, the color correction or color grading of the picture, because a lot of people, you mentioned an audience not knowing, next time you go see a movie, look at the colors that you see up there, assuming it's in color, right? And, it might have this bluish kind of tint to it all, or it might be reddish or orangish, right? Those are all deliberate choices that are made. So that's called color grading or correction. And then you have the composition of the score, huge, right? So the director sits down with the composer and they go through the whole movie and they talk about where we should have music, what kind of music. When you edit the film, you use a temp track. You might borrow music from other movies and put it in there to give the composer an idea of what you're looking for.
Sure.
And then, of course, another big thing is visual effects, if there are. And a huge part is sound design, especially in audiences today. Sound design is a huge aspect of a film. Creating a quality film hinges to a great degree on the sound. You have layers of sound, and that's part of transporting the viewer into that other world. The sound just sort of carries you away. Very important. So we're in the midst of all of that post-production right now.
Well, thank you for explaining that. That's fascinating. All right, we have a lot of people listening who are prayer warriors, all right? So let me have my son. You thought maybe October.
Yes.
How can people specifically pray for the project?
I would say specifically pray that the movie will become a viral sensation because we don't have name actors to draw all the people that would, let's go see the Liam Neeson movie.
Right.
Even though it's the same movie,
Well, it's taken 10 now, I think.
But Liam Neeson, so, there's a draw.
That's right.
We don't have those sort of built-in draws in this film. But we believe it's a film with heart. It's a film, as my production manager said during the time of filming, he said, this film, he said to me one day, this film is just quirky enough that it might really find an audience.
Interesting.
And it is a little quirky in places.
Yeah.
And I also would like to say to those prayer warriors who are obviously believers, I pray the church at large will get behind this film. It's not the churchy kind of film that maybe a lot are used to, but it is very, I want to say bold and centered on the faith. But it's done in a way that's taking into account that a lot of people in the audience don't share that faith.
Yeah.
So how do you talk? Do you talk through a bullhorn at
Yeah,
people who
that's
don't
right.
know the
No,
Lord?
you have to get to them other ways.
Right.
That's exactly right. And by the way, this program has an incredible reach, so you're already on your way. I mean, everybody comes here first. And you're thinking October...
Actually, I have come to you first. You're my first podcast about that.
Well, maybe you're in a lot of trouble, and I'm not sure. And you said watch for the streaming services?
Yes. I mean, we'll be, this is, we need money for marketing.
Okay.
I'm in the process right now of raising money for the marketing, publicity, which advertising would be a part of that, right? So we can advertise on TV and elsewhere, that you can watch it on Hulu or Amazon, or pray that Netflix would be open to it. That's a prayer request right there.
Okay.
But I don't want people to say, "Oh, God, give us Netflix, give us." No, God, give us the distribution that you want.
Yeah.
That really is the best.
Yeah.
The best.
He already knows.
He knows.
And he's working on that already.
Yes.
I have a feeling he's been working on that for a long time.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for being here and sharing your story, because when you're dealing with a child you love so much, and you talked last time about how you began with like a typical father, and you have the perfect child, and life sort of happens. I just want to, I think you and I would agree that really the message we have here is hope.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so there may be someone right now that's, man, I just don't see a way. I don't see a way. It's dark. But there's hope. So don't give up.
That's right. No.
Yeah.
And hope is, even in our Christian circles, it's often underrated.
Yes, it is.
Compared to love and faith. Love, of course, beats them all. We know that.
Yeah.
But we currently have a tagline for our film that says, "Love completes what hope begins." And you're right. Don't give up on hope. I haven't, and I won't.